Too bad we didn't do this episode yesterday. You know why?
Why?
Because then I could have said, top of the morning to you. And it would have like fit. I mean, with this, my natural hair being this color as it is, I look Irish. I mean, I am part Irish, but yeah. Anyways, top of the morning to you was how you have to say it the day after St. Patty's Day.
Well, I have a friend that she just put out a new album called Something Green. So yesterday she started posting, she said, great marketing idea. Everybody wear green today to support my new album.
Wow, that probably helped sales because I'm sure everyone knew it was all about this album release.
That's right. Yeah, and then suddenly everybody was wearing green. So.
Ceres. Hi.
Ceres.
You know, I think Ceres is going to have to carry the burden of this episode because we're doing an unthemed episode where it's just we're kind of riffing and hoping people have comments or questions just to see. Now, you could argue that we're just what's that?
No, we've done so many transmissions. We've run out of themes. That's what it is.
I don't think that's not true. Although you could have said it was true last week when we were going to originally do it, like that there could have been a laziness or haphazardness, but we decided to do this week because we weren't able to last week. So this is a real legitimate experiment, everyone.
No, and actually what we really did was we captured several random robot birds and downloaded their data, and we just figured we would talk about what was in each one, which we didn't know about in advance.
No, and that's true, and there's both the individual data sets from the birds, but then when you combine them, unexpected pattern emerges. But we'll talk about that later. David has a question for us. Oh, David asked, how did you both meet? And that ties right into James's question. Is it still Fascist Friday?
It's always Fascist Friday, James. Even not on Friday. It seems to be Fascist Friday.
Well, and the thing is, it's like when they asked the Hulk in one of the Avengers movies, like he's like, I finally figured out the secret to controlling my anger. To realize I'm always angry. It's like that, but with fascism. So, it's just always fascism.
Exactly. Where'd you capture the robot birds? Yeah. Well, that's a secret.
We can't. We're not at
because
liberty.
If we told that, then the other birds would come after us to rescue them. So.
Yes. So, how did we meet? I feel like we met at
on Facebook, where everybody meets.
Didn't we meet at that thing, like up in like? Wasn't there some sort of like?
The first time we met,
communities gathering of some things, and I remember feeling overwhelmed in general, but I do remember meeting you. Yeah. I'm like, well, okay, they're not all losers.
The first time we met in person was at the Christian Nurturing Communities event at St. John's University.
That's right.
But we had met on Facebook prior to that, and then then we re-met in person when we moved to Minneapolis.
That's right. You moved down here to kind of relocate.
Not nearly as interesting as the robot birds.
No, it's really there's not a lot of razzmatazz in our origin story. Yes, it is. Yes. Thank you for asking. We haven't been as explicit about it. It's kind of hard to talk about Fascism Friday all the time. I feel like everyone should just know by now. Just know.
Oh, Arnold had a message to Russia. No, that's got to be hilarious.
Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah, that's what Michelle says. Did you all watch Arnold's message to Russia?
I mean, it's amazing that if you say Arnold, that's the only Arnold. Either that or that little kid from Different Strokes, but he died, so it can't be him. Little throwback Friday there. We can't talk about the Grow Up Birds. I did not watch Arnold's message. I do want to see it.
I can't wait though.
David asks, explore public school funding and ways forward.
Yeah, it's the Minneapolis strike that's happening.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, I'm big on that topic, so I'd be happy to say a couple words about that. Yeah, I mean and this is interesting. It does kind of connect to the Fascist Friday thing, because this is a great example of the way that systems gaslight us. Right? So there's all this rhetoric in America about local controls of public schools, right? And this is so great. Like, you've just got this little group of people that your buddies that you elect to the school board, and you got this local funding, and so we've created this system where school monies come from local property taxes, and then are also dependent on local enrollment. And, as I said, there's all this rhetoric around, isn't this wonderful? Well, the fact is, it's not wonderful.
It's shitty.
Yeah, it's shitty.
The opposite of wonderful. Unless you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah, because what it does is it cements in place all of the inequalities that exist in society. So if you have a poor neighborhood that's been redlined out of economic wealth, like every Black neighborhood in America, pretty much, you are guaranteeing that school will never get adequate funding. Furthermore, if you're in an environment of declining population or aging population, so like most of rural America right now, you then also guarantee that you are going to have a populace that is not going to support schools, right? Because when you get to be, retirement age on a fixed income, the last thing you're going to want is your property taxes continually being raised to pay for schools. And in fact, what that is going to do, and it's happening all the time. I mean, I have two elderly Black neighbors in Minneapolis. One woman lives across the street, 2 doors down. Our property taxes have gone up a great deal in the last decade. They're going to get priced out of their homes, right? And so then you're going to automatically get a lot of resistance to school funding. So this is a mechanism that, under the guise of this great idea of local control of education, has pretty much doomed American public education to the shitty place that it's in, right? And then what happens is that you get white flight out of urban areas of various places. And so then all the rich white people go to some place like Minnetonka and suddenly they have a great school, right? Suddenly they have great schools. And then all the white people go, well, let's go where there are great schools, and they all congregate in the suburbs. And so you just have baked in not only the kind of anti-educational stance that's very popular in this country, but you've also baked in all of the socio-political inequalities that exist in America. And it's a disaster.
Yeah. And the alternatives, I mean, this is where conservatives freak out, because they require things that seem socialist to them, like state level funding, national funding, and a way that it's student-centered, so that you have every student having access to the same kinds of quality of resources, and then you even weigh it on a sliding scale towards their level of being disadvantaged or marginalized within the system. It's like the conservatives' worst nightmare. But it's what needs to happen. Otherwise, it's unjust. Otherwise, rich people have rich neighborhoods and rich schools and can always opt out and do whatever the hell they want and abandon whoever they want, which is what's happening now.
Well, and then the other thing that goes on, right, is that by parceling out public money into all these different little categories, people are like, well, we don't have the money for it because this is the school budget. You know what? I don't give a shit if I pay my taxes from a 1040, an R90, a QXW. I don't.
C3PO is the form I use.
I mean, I don't care if it's on my check when I go out to a restaurant. I don't care if it's a special assessment bonding, blah blah blah. It's all public dollars. It's all the same, right? But we get this idea, we get brainwashed into this thinking that this pool of public money is fundamentally different from this pool of public money. No, it's not. It's all our tax dollars. It all comes from the same place, right? And so yeah, people are like, well, the Viking Stadium isn't the same pool of money because it came from a special state bonding bill, and this. Fuck you. Like, it's people paying dollars into the public trough. And the fact that we can just go ahead and raise $450 million for the giant sand crawler in downtown Minneapolis, and then when we don't have enough money for schools, I mean, you got to think about this.
Nice Star Wars reference.
Yes,
right?
thank you.
Is it Star Wars or is it Dune? They both have sand crawlers.
That's Star Wars.
Okay.
Well, DG had R2D2 or
yeah,
2R-D2.
Which that's the form. Which because DG is in a higher tax bracket. That's the form for rich people. I didn't know that. You bastard.
Yeah. So it when you think about that, an educational aid in America in the 21st century in an urban environment, their starting salary is $24,000 a year. That tells you all you need to know about how much we care about kids and education.
Yeah, and just some context. I'm not sure everyone watching knows this, but Minneapolis public schools, different unions have voted to strike. Basically the food service union settled. But basically the teachers, all the various types of teaching and teaching support are on strike. And my wife teaches. And it's interesting. There's all sorts of shittery about it because she's been a teacher for 25 years. And she started in St. Paul Public Schools and it's over at Minneapolis Public Schools. And it hasn't gone up in 25 years, the income level, by that much at all. Definitely not on pace. The insurance is substantially worse. And she's an ABE teacher, adult basic education. And even though she has all that experience, they granted her money commensurate for 10 years of experience. She's still now at the starting pay of what a first year K-12 teacher would be, even though she's got licensures and all sorts. It's just kind of wonky. And it's because of all this BS about there not being enough money in the budget, as though the budget is some sort of like the 10 Commandments. It's ridiculous. More comments. Michelle wrote, "Yeah." I think that was said in the Wall Street infection. I saw Dan's post about school funding. It was lit.
Thank you.
DG freaking loves us all. Yeah, Sauls. I don't know how you do y'all, but I like to refer to ourselves. Series writes, local control is white propaganda speak. Local control by marginalized folks never mattered when gentrification happened. Ain't that the truth? It's kind of like a sneaky bastard move. Ellen writes, shout out to my fellow substitutes who aren't even allowed in teachers' unions.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many there's so many broken parts to the system, right? Um, and yeah, the entire system relies on this cadre of substitute teachers. And I'll tell you, if you ever want to really understand a little bit what's going on, um, sign up to be a substitute teacher in an urban school system sometime. Any school system, but urban substitute. I was a substitute teacher for a while in San Francisco, and you get a very, very serious education about the depth and the breadth of how broken our educational system is, and and then of course what happens is the classic, the rats eating each other on the sinking ship, right? And we're seeing this in the midst of the Minneapolis strike, is that then you've got parents turning on teachers, and teachers turning on the other groups of people, and and everybody saying, oh, it's your fault, it's your fault. And this is a great example of how the lack of systems thinking, and the fact that you can have this overarching system that is really oppressing people,
Mm-hmm.
and all they can see, especially if they're just trained as individuals, is, oh, you're not doing your job. No, you're not doing your job. And then they just start all yelling at each other about that,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to taking a step back and going, wait a minute, why is it that the military can get $126 million a plane for a plane that doesn't fly, and we can't get enough money to buy pencils and paper in a classroom, right? I mean, it's completely insane. But when you're in the thick of that, and when you've got your sort of head down and you're not looking at this wider view, it's very easy to get subsumed in that kind of thinking.
I want to hear a sad little anecdote about unions and teaching.
Yeah.
I used to be an educational assistant at a transition program, which is for kids with EBD, basically. So I back then I was very conservative. It was my early 20s, and I didn't want to be in the union because unions are bad. So I paid fair share, but they still kept asking me to join the union, to be the union rep, because I was a little smarty pants boy who talked good. And so they were always trying to get me to join the union to be the union rep. But I was like, did you know that union money supports abortions? And I would just kind of shut them down. And I look back at that, I'm like, damn it, I could have been a union rep. That would have been a nice little quiver or arrow in my quiver of cool things for a leftist to be.
Yeah, you could have played the banjo and sung union songs and stuff.
Yeah, I could have I could have reenacted Mattawan, but in suburban Twin Cities, including the shootout.
Well,
and then the one good cop.
Don't go too far.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, David, for supplying us with that energy.
Where are we going to go?
Well, here's where we're going to go. This was, I saw a little clip this morning, and I was thinking about our friend Viv Henry, who's been on the show, who's the Minnesota representative for the Poor People's Campaign, but is also, her big thing is mental health and leaders, and she's always posting about this. And so I saw this little video interview with, I think it's Tolstoy's great granddaughter, who used to be married to one of the Russian oligarchs, who was Putin's banker.
Oof.
So, they're interviewing her, trying to find everybody to slam Putin. But one of the things she said about halfway through the interview was, well, I think he has a personality disorder. Right? He probably has narcissistic personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the things that Viv is posting about all the time, right? How many sociopaths are in power and leaders, and and it really. I mean, I think that this is a very interesting phenomenon about leadership in a fallen world. And we're always talking about these systems and principalities and powers, and I think that there is this interesting reality of kind of demonic possession, right? That these systems seem to find and attract people who have these very these mental formations that are very much amoral. Sometimes they're immoral, but at least they're amoral, and it's then very easy for them to get involved with these power systems, and it's incredibly destructive. But it just struck me that it was fascinating how kind of ubiquitous it really is.
I mean, it's just
I just wanted
interesting.
to mention that.
It's interesting to think about, like in some, I feel like more Jungian, Freudian sorts of psychology. I've read about like how some people who are narcissistic or sociopathic have like a lacunia, like so there's just a big gap in their personality, and emptiness. And it makes sense to think about like, well, how the system, the self-preservation instinct of a system, can fill that gap in, and so the person just enacts the impulse without ever being aware, and that's just kind of fills in the gap. And so it's interesting to think about it that way, like, and it kind of complexifies the idea of we don't struggle against flesh and blood, but the principalities and powers, which I totally agree with. But sometimes you have leaders who embody the principalities and powers astonishingly, and so it's worth calling them an enemy and saying that we are fighting against them, although maybe not in a way that's trying to off them. Like, it's just they blur the line between individual persons and the systems that they lead.
All right, we got some good comments here.
It's how do we figure out a way to reduce the rats treating each other like piñatas without forced teaming or political bypassing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the age-old organizing question, right? And I think that when I think about some of the original work in liberation theology with these groups that actually sat down to reflect on what was going on and read scripture and say, oh wow, look, like these corrupt kings in the Bible, that's just like our president. And part of the problem, right, is that it is a learning experience. It is kind of an educational experience. And so, I think Sirius, to me, always gets this question of how do we spend our time and energy, right? Do we commit to this sort of transformative work? And are we able to do that in a way that's actually kind of fun, right? That that creates community, that where we sing songs and we do cool theater stuff and we do ritual and we support each other, and and again, the systems are always trying to distract us away from that kind of stuff, and so so it's really challenging. I mean, there's not a simple answer to that, but to me, that's a very key question and issue to at least be aware of.
I mean, it's interesting, and this isn't, I know it's not a cure-all, but it is interesting how early union movements, and which tended to be much more radical, just had a strong kind of shared educational project piece to it. And you see this within like the Russian Revolution, kind of those sorts of different approaches they were doing, which isn't exactly unions, although there was syndicalism involved. And then, or even with Che Guevara and how when he was leading troops, he also was doing educational programming too. Like,
well, and you think about the Black Panthers, right? They had their
Mhm.
freedom schools, and they were always wanting to educate people, and I mean, I think in some ways, if you want to get sort of super unconscious, sinister about the principalities and powers, you don't want to have a good education for the populace, right? Because that is going to create people that are going to want to undermine these systems.
Yeah.
And
You want conformist sorts of pragmatic.
Yeah, you want conformists, you want people that are scared, you want people that feel bad about themselves because they didn't get an A. You want all that kind of stuff. And you don't really want an empowered citizenry.
Well, you end up getting like, and there's some truth to this, but it drives me nuts when people say it. I mean, it's usually nice white liberals who will say, look, people who are working jobs in unions don't have time to mess around with learning. And so there's this weird kind of disconnection, as though people who are working class are dumb and don't want to read. And they don't have time for it, which there is a component of truth to the don't have time because workers in the United States work more hours than ever before. So that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a sort of infantilizing that always happens with white liberalism towards any kind of group that's marginalized or struggling. And somehow it ends up with those white liberals being the educated elite who think for the rest of the populace. So James asks, are you ever going to do a transmission where the two of you are in the same place again? No, we decided that it's better if we're never in the same place.
No, we actually have talked about that off and on over the last few months. So we're slowly working up to it. But I don't know. We were talking about the fact, well, we'd then have to have a couple of cameras. The really early transmissions are like, so the tech is so bad. We're kind of sitting in that living room, kind of have the laptop as far away as possible so we can both get in there. So I don't know. Our standards have improved so vastly that they're really hard for us, but I'd like to do it.
Here's another direction. This is good. Alan asks, says Ashe is a frequent poster of Culinary Feats. It's true. And so I don't even post most of the things I make. I'm curious about what Dan eats on a given day.
Yeah, well, we eat really well. Kind of very plant-based diet. Let's see, what was one thing we made the other day? We made this really good apple quinoa salad, which was delicious. You can substitute mangoes into that if you get a ripe mango. That's also really, really good. A different flavor, a little sweeter than the apples, a little more tart. We use Granny Smith green apples. I eat a lot of salads. I'm kind of part rabbit. So
the ancient enemy of the birds.
Yeah, well, I don't know. The rabbits and the birds sort of coexist. The squirrels and the birds have a little more of a contentious relationship, at least in my neighborhood.
Well, yeah.
and they come swinging through the trees. So, so that's kind of what I eat. I don't do nearly as many culinary feats as Ashe does. Although we eat very well.
Yeah.
I do want to, speaking of that, I'm glad you brought this up, Ellen, because I want to remember. I want your pastrami recipe.
Mine?
So,
or Ellen's?
No, yours.
Okay, well,
Ashe.
we can talk about it.
Yeah. So
it helps that I have this fancy little oven thing that makes everything
I know,
easier.
you have a very cool little oven.
I have a home consumer grade combi oven, which includes steaming capacity. So right now I'm sous videing a pork shoulder to make into a sort of like pulled Korean style pulled pork, which I'm going to have later tonight. tasty.
It's really good.
I'll take pictures
All
and
right.
post it. James writes, it would be fun to see yous on Vocation fighting the man. I mean, we need to figure out. We need to take down the man and film it. Ed writes, those kinds of rituals and songs are counterintuitive to patriarchal domination system. For sure. I mean, it's not just fluffiness that, people like Emma Goldman will say, like, or this is a paraphrase of what she said, but if you can't dance, it's not my revolution. Those sorts of things, we had a whole episode on this. It's really important. And it's not only important because it's good to let off a little steam now and again. It's good because it actually forms us. And it's that's what we're working towards. Mm-hmm. The idea of a glum, bitter, angry, forcing themselves radical is just not good, because they'll recapitulate that shit when they.
That's one of the reasons that activists burn out, because that's often their approach to things.
Just throw yourself further and harder at problems.
Yeah. No, I've always said that fun is a very underrated theological category.
It's part of the subplot of The Name of the Rose. If anybody wants to check that out.
There you go. That's great.
Great film and book. It's actually a newer miniseries that came out a few years ago. Yeah, that has I can't remember the actor. It's an Italian production, but it has a well-known American actor in it. I can't remember his name right now. A series writes, that white liberal BS regarding working class and learning makes me mad. They need to look at themselves. White people don't.
Makes me very mad.
Ed writes, the education system is the boring, deadly product of the rationalist patriarchy. There certainly is a lot of death dealing in the system, and that's not a knock on teachers. It's the way policies and different things get pushed and funding, and so it reinforces this idea of like kids going to school for 12 years so they can get a job, and then it's not an accident they get shackled with debt. That's part of the design of the system. And so then they have to be...
Or end up in prison.
Yeah. James says, I want Elm's pastrami recipe too.
It's not Elm's, it's Ashe's.
Yeah, but like if
Wrong
it's
tree.
Elm would make a plant-based pastrami. Would you really? And it's possible. I mean, maybe a tempeh type situation.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the last
Don Turturro is in that Italian production.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a little uneven compared to the film with the Sean Connery film, but it's a mini-series, and it brings in more of the background from the book of the Fraticelli, the kind of the radical banditry sect of the Franciscans, which was a thing.
I gotta check that out. Yeah,
if you're a theological church history nerd, or if you just like medieval type stuff, it's a good movie series.
All right, so I'm going to end with this interesting conundrum. Speaking of theological nerdery,
okay.
So I've been teaching this class on Celtic spirituality and pilgrimage, and so Saint Kevin, the funniest saint name ever, is sometimes known as the Saint Francis of Ireland because he was into birds and animals and stuff like that. The problem is he lived 500 years before Francis. So shouldn't Francis be known as the Saint Kevin of Italy? And on that note, we'll see you next week.
Dope. Last Word, John Turturro is great in the new series Severance for those interested. And then I'll have another one. When is Nicolas Cage guest starring? He's always guest starring in my heart. I have a Nick Cage. I have a Nick Cage pillow. I'll share next time, and Dan can have Bubo, and I can have Nick, like shirtless Nick Cage pillow.
There we go.
You'll see, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.